Good evening, everybody. So I spent the whole evening feverishly writing, trying to figure out what I wanted to say. And I want to just start off by thanking my timekeeper because I'll have 5 minutes and I need to stick to it because I know I could go over that by at least 35 more. So what I want to start off by saying is actually kind of following off from what the Reverend talked about. And I actually think that schizophrenia is kind of the foundation that we could use. And so schizophrenia, for anybody who doesn't fully understand the disorder, is a psychiatric disorder that is marked by symptoms of psychosis. So that would be things like hallucinations, seeing or hearing things, or delusions, believing maybe somebody's listening to your thoughts or somebody's out to get you. And what the Reverend just spoke about kind of feeds into what I want to talk about a little more, which is an alienation from self. And I think that this is not only a massive precursor to mental illness, but it is also something that is a byproduct of the system in which we live. We currently live in a system in which, Steve sort of alluded to it before, your economic viability and your economic power is a marker of your access to dignity. So the more wealth you have is the more you are allowed to maintain your dignity. You're allowed to access things like healthcare, education. You're allowed to access job opportunities. Right now, we have two laws that I can think of that exclusively prohibit mentally ill people from sitting on boards. One is the non-profit organizations bill that is in draft, and the other is the Companies Act, which actually says that no member of the formation of the company can be a mentally ill person. And our Mental Health Act defines mental illness in very broad terms, including anybody who needs treatment or therapy. So that means that if you have a severe anxiety disorder and you need drugs, technically you can't sit on the board of any of these organizations. Now, if I am told that my dignity is a byproduct of my socioeconomic status, then how can I actually achieve that status if I'm told I can't earn an income or I can't earn a reasonable living? And as Steve spoke about, this issue of wages is actually instrumental to us being able to live dignified lives in the first place. We live in a capitalistic system that tells us that depending on who you are not actually allowed to live a dignified life. So the Reverend mentioned that the church just barely tolerates LGBTQI people. It has been a massive antagonist to progressive movements about autonomy and choice. And if I can't actually choose who I am or choose who I want to be, choose how I express myself, then how am I able to live that fulfilling life, that dignified life? For me, what has to change in our existing system and in the status quo that we are actively maintaining is that the majority needs to stop upholding the rules of the minority. So instead of us all agreeing to following the rule and law of the church or the rule and law of some select group of people who have decided who is allowed to be dignified, we should all agree that everybody has that right. So that that person who seems like a madman just because he's talking to a sign, sit down and listen to what he has to say. And in fact, I will argue that madness to a large extent is a concept. When you speak to people who are quote unquote mad, you'll recognize that one of the things that seems to almost be central to many of their expressions is that autonomy, that desire to be whoever they want to be in that moment or express themselves in whatever. It's almost as if they've snapped from our sense of reality. They're living their own reality, and it almost seems sometimes freeing to look at this person. You are shouting at a sign, and you don't even care. If I did that same thing, now I can't get a job. I'm afraid, I'm terrified of what next I would be able to do or not be able to do because of this one action. And so, for me, it's about trying to figure out how do we live in a world that encourages and almost mandates empathy and forces us to look at people as full human beings as opposed to some subset of the society that we have decided is less deserving of one thing or another. Essentially, I suppose maybe in all of my ramblings, because I don't even know if I'm making sense right now, but you all will tell me, A lot of sense? Great, thank you. Glad. Now I hope I can make $1. I can make $1. Anyway, what I would like to say is just that we have to move away from living in a society that tells us our authentic self is unacceptable and into a society that tells us our authentic self is the only self and the self we need to live. With that, my time's up. Thank you all. Y'all have been